I'm Scott Al Miller. This is my life living in Leon, Nicaragua. Today, I want to talk about where are people getting their information from. I think you know what I mean. You start seeing all these websites where people are talking about, oh, how to compare this country to that country. And, you know, they give all this detailed information about different countries and rank them in different lists and stuff. How happy people are, how free people are, how, you know, what their income is, their buying power. And then you say to yourself, wait a second, how are they getting this information? We always have this idea that there's some magical place that information comes from, but surprise, there's not. Let's talk about it after the bump. It's true. A lot of these websites, whether it's, Deloitte and Touche or, some, big accounting firms or big information firms or even government agencies or newspapers or, sites comparing cost of living or relocation sites giving you comparisons against different countries, when you look at them, it seems like they are very authoritative, right? They've got all this detailed information, they've got numbers, they've got all this stuff. And then you ask, where does this stuff actually come from? I live in a small country, and I can tell you that we have events happen all the time. We're in a key location within the country. I'm in the second city, and we never see reporters on the street. We're never being interviewed. No one's collecting statistics. And the information that they have on a lot of these sites is absolutely wrong in every possible way. If you look at the United States State Department, many times they don't even allow the State Department officials to travel around Nicaragua to know what Nicaragua is like. So some of those officials, even those who've been here for a long time, may actually struggle to even be able to form a good mental picture of Nicaragua as a country, let alone be able to advise someone about what it's like or what people are thinking or anything of the sort. You hear talk all the time about things in Nicaragua. Now, we're an extreme example because we're a super small country with very little information getting out, and the countries that tend to collect this information are not often on super friendly terms with Nicaragua, so the combination means they're often operating in the dark, and they often want to be able to portray Nicaragua a certain way. And so where are they getting those numbers and information from that they're giving to people? And the answer here is with many places that they're not. It has to be being made up. And I noticed that at first when looking for this information in different places, that often the information we'd find online in different websites was just wrong or wildly out of date. You'd be like, well, this is what it was a decade ago, but it's not what it's like anymore. Why are they still showing that? How do they not know that it's wrong? And the thing that really tipped me off more than anything, beyond just observation and how obvious it is when I found out about Lonely Planet. So Lonely Planet is famous for being the leading travel guide publisher. So if you want to go get a travel guide to Nicaragua, Lonely Planet is one of your few choices. Well, when you read it, you get a feeling that they really know what they're talking about. They list the best hotels, the best restaurants, all kinds of things. But then when you live here, it makes you question, wait a second. How are they developing that information? I grew up in Western New York, and I can tell you that no Lonely Planet person is ever hanging out in Western New York. How do they know about Western New York? How do they know which wineries are good? How do they know which restaurants are good? How do they know what's coming or going, what's changing? And the answer is they don't. They have no idea. Same thing here in Nicaragua. Out on the beach where I spend a lot more time, it's well known that about 7 or 8 years ago, someone from Lonely Planet was actually here. Briefly, and they blew through town. They stopped at a few different places. They added a few places to their recommendations in the book and then disappeared. And no one from Lonely Planet has ever returned. No one has come to see the new places. No one has come to see which ones have closed. No one has evaluated if the places they said were good are still good. And so what you have, if you look at Lonely Planet, it wasn't accurate 8 years ago. It was just a random backpacker coming through town and taking some quick observations. So at least they got some names right. They listed some real-world prices of a few places, but they didn't try out all the restaurants. They didn't do a comparison. They didn't come through and actually give you information that you wouldn't have had if you were just passing through. They just came, wrote down the things you would learn in a cursory glance, and made some random recommendations and took off. And that was it. And those recommendations are now frozen in time. The majority of the places that they list as being the best, hottest places to go here in Las Pinitas have been closed so long that I've never seen them open. And I've been here a long time. And the places that are thriving today don't exist in the book at all. And the places that are still around, most of them are completely different than they were at that time. Everything has changed. And that's just one beach. When you extrapolate this over an entire country, you realize, and this is a really popular beach, right? A really easy one to keep tabs on compared to most of the country. There's no way that they have the slightest inkling of what it's like in Managua, what are the hot zones, even of the city. They wouldn't even know what neighborhoods are safe or dangerous. Everything in the book is probably wrong, other than knowing which waterfalls are taller, which mountains are taller. Those things probably haven't changed in 8 years, but anything that involves humans probably has. So Lonely Planet, which is widely regarded as one of the best resources for travelers, is so bad that I would literally call it a negative. It's not that having the book would be not as useful as it should be. It's actually anti-useful because it's just useless information. Nothing in it can be trusted. And that's a really important way to look at it. Once you know the data is false, right? Now there's a difference. You publish a book, you know it's going to be a year and you can gauge it's been a year of changes. Yeah, things are going to change. They can't write a new book every year. Granted. And you can even put some time frames on it. They should put years on their books, but they really don't. They treat it as if it was current and authoritative at the time that they wrote it. First of all, that's not true. And then they treat it as still being current and authoritative so long later as to be meaningless. At some point, the idea of promoting that as travel advice is dishonest, and I will never buy anything from Lonely Planet ever again because I know how they operate now. And I assume most places are the same. How could they be otherwise? There's no reasonable way for them to keep a person who just travels around Nicaragua all the time writing their review books. In fact, if you were going to do that, someone like me would be able to do that, but why would I do that for Lonely Planet? They will never pay me as much as I could make by turning that into my own book and selling that. I would make more money that way. So if I was going to put in that effort, I would just make my own book, not work for Lonely Planet. How would Lonely Planet encourage someone to work for them? They'd have to pay so much to that consultant to have a meaningful person able to actually do that. And then that person would be really frustrated that they spend all their time in one country and don't get to travel. Like, it's just a really hard thing to do. And so they don't. That's their answer. They just don't bother because people aren't actually checking, and how would they? So you don't know. Well, that's how a lot of things, I believe, are working here in Nicaragua, but all over the world, I'm sure it's the same, that there's all these agencies that need to produce information, but there's no actual means of producing that information, right? They want to know how happy people are. They want to know what they think about different things in the country. They want to know, right? What are they going to do? They can't actually go around and get a large-scale survey of people. That doesn't really work. It'd be super expensive. And how do you make sure it makes sense? And how do you get enough people to do these kinds of things who actually know enough about the country to be able to do so meaningfully? When we have people in the United States that do these large-scale surveys and collect information about the American populace, it's a really rich country with an enormous number of people. And the people who are doing it are working on such a scale that they're able to be paid well to be experts in the system and to know the society and the culture that they're working with. But coming to Nicaragua to do those things, you would have to put in the same amount of time and effort and money for collecting a very small amount of research. In the United States, that one person has a pool of 350 million people that they're working with. That same person needs all the same expertise to get meaningful data out of Nicaragua for 7 million people. So it changes the economics of it completely, and basically no one can do it. So what do we find all the time? What we find is a lot of online resources are simply taking really easy to find online snippets of information, whether it's just online published laws or people repeating financial information or who knows what, and then calling it a resource and packaging it for resale. And that's it. And they leave out that they don't have a credible source. They didn't do the research themselves. And the people that they're getting it from, they didn't vet. And so you have layer after layer of people with questionable information, and no one actually knows what's going on. And Wikipedia is a great example here. Go look up the size of different cities in Nicaragua on a few different Wikipedia pages. They're not tied together in any way. They don't have a single source of data. So if you go to one page on Wikipedia, it shows wildly different city sizes than the next page on Wikipedia. If you go to those individual city pages, the numbers they have for those cities wildly different than the list pages and so on. Even Wikipedia has no good source of information. And living here in Nicaragua, I can tell you, we don't have any really good way to gauge the size of our cities. We say that the city of León has 300,000 people, and it probably does. But what exactly does that mean? Where exactly is the limit that you're counting to? Who's taking the census? I've not been counting it in a census. I've not seen anyone take a census. I have no idea how they're doing it. They say how many expats we have in the country, but I've heard that those numbers are completely wrong, and like everyone has this guess about things. The reality is, and this is true all over the world, there isn't as much solid information about populations, about economics, about businesses, about all these things as people think that there is, but it makes it really easy for people to try to scam you using that information. And what led me to this discussion was I've had a number of discussions with people recently about Nomad Capitalist, and at first we're like, yeah, it seems like they're doing a pretty good job. They've got some good information. It's very polished, but when you start watching it, we start realizing, wait, they're never showing the locations they're talking about. We're not confident that they're actually on the ground traveling anywhere. We're not confident that they actually have knowledge of the places. We started losing a lot of confidence. It seemed like someone sitting in an office somewhere who's just reading some news articles and then commenting on them. And yeah, there's a little bit of deep research being done, but the stuff you do from an office, right? You sit down and you pull up a couple different news sources, you go to Wikipedia, you make sure you have some solid numbers, you look up some basic tax codes, and then you make a video about it. And that's fine, nothing wrong with that. It's a way to make money, making a YouTube video, but it looks like they're never on the ground and don't have any actual working knowledge of the places that they're talking about. And this was just a suspicion, but it seemed pretty obvious because they try to talk about doing global relocation and all this business stuff around the world, yet they're never showing those locations. And if they were really there and really had information about it, it seems like you would want to really verify, look, we come here, here's the person who is doing research for this country, and so forth. So you would ask, okay, so how do they know about Honduras? Do they have a person who lives in Honduras? Well, no, probably not. Okay, so how do you know? Because I can tell you, when we see people visiting Nicaragua and then leave, they don't tend to have any idea of how things work. Not that there's anything wrong with visiting and leaving, but there's an expectation that if you do that, you're not going to have a deep knowledge and be able to answer deep questions about Nicaragua. You're not going to be able to explain to someone all the intricacies of when you do and don't want residency, or what the different types of residency are, or what the realistic effort or time frame are in getting them, or who tends to get them and who tends not to, and how border control tends to treat you. There's a lot of things that you can't look up, and they're not definitive. It's not like you do this, then this happens, and it's period. That's just black and white how it always happens. There's a lot of like, well, here's an anecdote, we have to verify it. And so what you end up with is people operating mostly from unverified anecdotes. And that's what we see sometimes on the channel. We hear these stories. Oh, such and such happened down in San Juan del Sur. There was a tourist and this happened to them. Really? Did it? Can we verify that? Does anyone actually know this person? This is a tiny country. If this actually happened, we should be able to locate someone who was directly involved in a matter of hours and have no problem verifying this. Yet very few things ever get verified. It's a lot like these stories that came out of Australia that there was someone getting rabies exposure here in Nicaragua. Yet it took only minutes to go and verify that no such person ever existed. There was nothing to make the story seem credible in any way whatsoever. In a big place like the United States, you'd be lost in the anonymity of a giant country. But here in Nicaragua, that anonymity doesn't exist. If you were actually here, if you're talking about an actual hostel or restaurant, we're not looking at the abstract one of millions of restaurants in the country. We'd be saying, oh, it's one of 2 restaurants on that block. Which one was it? We need to know. Oh, it was made up. They thought no one would call their bluff, and that seems to be happening. So with Nomad Capitalist, I happened to come across their page on Nicaragua, and I think we're going to go in from being outside. We're going to sit down in the office at the desk, and I want to run through some of this information and show where they're getting it from, because I think their information. So as a show like Nomad Capitalist, where they're helping people with moving abroad, they're talking about taxes and freedom and all these things. There's certain countries that are very prominent for this. And if you're going to do a global scale for this, you need to have certain ones under your belt to have any semblance of credibility. In Southeast Asia, that definitely includes Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, Malaysia. You have to have Nicaragua, Mexico, Panama, Costa Rica, Paraguay, Colombia, Tanzania, Rwanda. There's a number. Right? There are certain ones you have to have. There's lots that are very fringe. Extremely few people, the DRC, very few people are ever going to want to move to the DRC actively move to the DRC, and nor would you normally make a recommendation to go there. I'm not saying you shouldn't go to the DRC, but I'm saying that when it comes to something like Nomad Capitalist, DRC is never going to come up as the recommendation. It just isn't going to be the mix for any number of people. But places like Nicaragua and Panama and Mexico are on a regular basis. You can't skip Nicaragua. It needs to be one of your core expertises, or you're not doing the kind of due diligence that would be required to be a consultancy. Nicaragua offers some of the best cost of living, some of the best safety, some of the best freedoms, and while it does have negatives as well, it has such strengths that there's a lot of people for whom it is a very important key consideration, and so you can't skip it. It can't be one of the places you don't know. You could not know Honduras. You could maybe not know Guatemala. They're much less likely to be places that make sense in a recommendation quadrant, but it would still be pretty crazy not to know those and have pretty deep information on them. But you definitely need Nicaragua. It's a unique offering that's so extremely good that you just can't be honestly trying to help people and not have full-time people on the ground in Nicaragua learning this stuff. And that's what you would need. There's no way to do what Nomad Capitalist pretends to do if they didn't have a full-time person, at least in Nicaragua, as long with many other countries like Malaysia and Thailand and some of the others that we mentioned. You have to be full-time. You have to be going through those experiences to start to have enough information to be able to give advice on it. That's important. You can't just visit for a little while and then give advice. You don't know enough about the actual processes. And so when we look at Nomad Capitalist's actual stuff on Nicaragua, I think pretty quickly you realize that it's just fake. So let's dig in. So my goal here isn't to pick on Nomad Capitalist, and I definitely am picking on Lonely Planet. But the thing is that there's something you need to be wary of, is that especially with a place like Nicaragua, but this is just true everywhere, there's very little incentive for businesses to actually do any diligence and look up information. And there's very little information for them to get. So it's an extremely difficult thing on one hand, while having no real incentive to no reward for doing it on the other. So if Nomad Capitalists went out and put in a huge amount of money, they hired a full-time person like me to come live in Nicaragua and just collect data and like give feedback. Okay, here's what it's like on the ground. Here's what different communities are like. Here's what people actually pay for electricity. Here's what people actually pay for rent. If they had that real information like we're getting by living here, would it make them any more money? No, they're just a business, and giving fake information, giving information they just pulled from some website somewhere and they can put small print somewhere saying where they got it, that's sufficient for them to make as much money as they're going to get. People who are going to pay them money and watch their videos aren't going to go away because they are not going to come in bigger droves because they get better information. The quality of their information isn't what's attracting people. It's this idea that you can just hand off this decision to someone else and get lazy about some of the core decisions in your life is very attractive to people, and that's what's driving people to them. But it's a very dangerous path to go down, just blindly trusting people who have no reason to have that knowledge and no reason to care about giving you that knowledge. So that's just something to watch out for that I hadn't really thought about until I lived here. But being in a place like Nicaragua so quickly, you observe that what you're hearing from other sources, not just the United States, not just North America, not just propaganda stuff, but just casual information on Wikipedia, on wherever, that's obviously wrong or obviously not capable of being obtained. How would Wikipedia get that information? How would Nomad Capitalist have that information? If Nicaragua's government doesn't have that information, how do they have it, right? Some of the things we know here is that the reported real estate transactions are nothing like the actual real estate transactions. Well, that's something that, yes, the government here knows, but they can't put a tracking number on it. And certainly someone outside the country can't even begin to put a tracking number on it. And so if you look at official sites, if you look at statistics, you may have a very different bit of information than if you're on the ground. And what's common knowledge here is often missing from these discussions. And what's common laws and such are often missing from these discussions. And some really outrageously, obviously wrong things are sometimes said, as was with the Nomad Capitalist saying that, you know, you can't have dual passports. Really? What about all these people with dual passports? Oh yes, reality didn't occur to us that we could just look anywhere and see that that was true. Didn't occur to them to actually research. They just somehow got this idea and now are using it as the basis for decision making. So they actually have less information than just casually asking someone who moved to the country would give you about that country. And the other things are just meaningless. Thanks for joining me. Like and subscribe. If you'd like to help support the channel, you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/ScottAlanMiller. And as always, I'll see all of you tomorrow.